is day 19 for December 17th in our Advent story. All right, this chapter is called Decca of Megiddo. And if you've read any of his other books, then you'll know that he is the evil villain. Ishtar sat on his golden throne, his royal and loving subjects shouting his... He jerked awake. "What's going on here?" he shouted. It took a few minutes before he realized he was riding atop Musa and sat behind Jotham. "Good morning, friend," Jotham said. "It is daylight, and we still travel toward Jerusalem. Your servant Kazim lifted us up here into the night." "He is not a servant," Ishtar said, and then looked upward. "The star is gone. I will speak with my father." He slid down off the camel and ran forward along the caravan, which swayed slowly back and forth in the sun. He spoke with his father and then returned to Jotham. "My father said we followed the star all night," Ishtar reported as he walked alongside Musa. "They set their sight on it and followed its course still." The caravan continued on for a time and then stopped at a narrow plateau between the rocky hills. Only a few tents for the women were put up. All the men lay down to sleep out in the open. Jotham and Ishtar weren't tired, though, since they'd slept on the camel all night, so they set out exploring the desert hills. It was Kazim's turn to sleep, so Yazdan followed them. The boys found plenty to do. They chased scorpions and snakes, except for the ones they knew to be dangerous, and tried to catch the few small animals that they saw. But then, just before noon, they saw a rare sight. A silver fox was prowling around the bushes, stalking a hare a few feet away. Carefully, Jotham and Ishtar worked their way toward the bush, trying to sneak up on the fox. They didn't get closer than 20 feet before it heard them and took off running. The two boys went after the fox, leaping over scrub brush and rocks and laughing all the way. They scrambled up some boulders taller than a camel. Ishtar glanced around and realized he'd lost Yazdan in the maze. But then he spied the fox, sitting at the top of the hill, and as if on cue, both boys leapt at it, missing it by only inches. Ishtar started to follow it down the other side when Jotham suddenly screamed and grabbed him by the collar. "Decca!" Jotham screamed. Ishtar screamed too, though he wasn't really sure why. Then he looked where his friend was pointing. There, sitting on a rock by fire, eating his breakfast, was a man who looked like all the nightmares that had ever terrified Ishtar's dreams. Farther down the hill, Ishtar saw two men jump up from where they'd been sleeping. "Run!" Jotham yelled, and the two boys took off back down the hill toward the caravan, their feet pounding the ground, sometimes slipping on loose rocks. Jotham was in the lead and looked back behind them. "They're catching up!" he yelled, and Ishtar ran faster. They came around a hill, and just as he ran between two clumps of brush, Ishtar hollered as the ground disappeared beneath his feet. He fell into a dark hole and landed with a thud that hurt his ankle. He looked up and saw the hole was just big enough for him to have fallen through. When he stood, it was short enough that his head could stick up through it, which he did. "Yuck!" he exclaimed. Jotham looked back where they had come from and then jumped on top of Ishtar's shoulders, getting him back into the hole. The two boys slammed onto the floor of the cave. Ishtar's ankle twisted again and he started to protest, but Jotham quickly clamped his hand over his friend's face. Both boys listened as a man's running feet passed the cave and kept going. After a few moments, Jotham let go of Ishtar. "Ow!" Ishtar said. "That hurt." "Trust me," Jotham said, panting. "It would hurt a great deal more if Decca were to catch us." Jotham thought for a moment, then tore a piece off his tunic and wrapped it around a stick. With a piece of metal and a stone, he lit the cloth on fire, which seemed like magic to Ishtar. "What are you doing?" Ishtar asked. "We're going to follow this tunnel," Jotham said, not realizing that wasn't the question Ishtar was asking. "We're what?" "We cannot go back outside," Jotham continued. "Decca and his men have probably already figured out we did not make it back to the caravan and are hiding somewhere. They will be searching the area above us." Ishtar looked at the rock ceiling over his head and shuddered. "Then let's move quickly," he said. "What direction shall we go?" Jotham looked back and forth and then turned his head left. "This way," he said, "and do not look directly at the torch, or you will not be able to see in the dark." "I cannot see in the dark in any event," Ishtar answered. "When looking in the dark, do not look where you want to look. Look just to the side of the thing and you will see it. It is how Jehovah made our eyes to work. Ishtar didn't comment about Jehovah, but discovered he really could see in the dark by looking to the side of the thing he wanted to see. Slowly they climbed along the jagged edges of the tunnel with Jotham in the lead. Ishtar was terrified. Never in his life had he been more than a few paces away from Kazim, but he followed his new friend, favoring his hurt ankle. All of a sudden, the floor of the tunnel leveled out and sloped downhill. The boys edged their way forward, and Ishtar's heart pounded in his chest, thinking that maybe this wasn't such a good idea. He was just about to say they should turn back when a man's voice came haunting them through the cave. "Little one," came the faint, evil voice. Ishtar wondered for a moment who was talking to little one. "Little one, come back to me. I'm going to kill you, little one. You may run, but I'm going to catch you and kill you." "It's Decca," Jotham whispered close to Ishtar's ear. Ishtar stared at Jotham in the firelight and wondered what he could have done to make the thief so mad. "Friend of the little one," came the voice again, "listen to me. I will not harm you. Bring your friend to me and I shall spare your life." Jotham's eyes grew wide and he looked at Ishtar. "I would never do such a thing," Ishtar thought. He shook his head at Jotham, who smiled back, and then they ran on. Ishtar on Jotham's heels, his ankle suddenly feeling much better. They passed through an archway cut into the rock, and Ishtar saw it was covered with writings in several languages, but he only had time to read the word death in Greek. A moment later, they skidded to a stop. "It is death," Ishtar cried. "Run!" Jotham shouted, but both boys stood there, having a great terrified breath transfixed by what they saw. We must leave this place," Ishtar cried, but neither of them could move. They inched their way forward, cut into the walls of the cave in front of them. As far as the boys could see were small alcoves, and in each alcove was a grave of dead bodies, each of them wrapped in a cloth. "Who would do such a terrible thing?" Ishtar asked, his nose drenched in disgust. "What terrible thing?" Jotham panted. "To put dead bodies in caves with no sarcophagus." "What's a sarcophagus?" "Sarcophagus," Ishtar corrected. Sarcophagus. I can't even say it. "The burial box of the dead. I've never seen anyone buried in a box before. My people just wrap dead ones in burial cloths and cover them with spices." Ishtar thought this was pretty crude and very cruel, but didn't say anything more. The boys realized that Decca could reach them at any moment, and he started up the tunnel again. After a few minutes, the evil voice returned, a little louder this time. "Little one, look," he said. "It is the bodies of your ancestors. What a good place for you to die." Then there came a screeching, evil laugh, and Ishtar ran a little faster. Jotham and Ishtar ran for what seemed like hours. They were almost as afraid of the dead bodies as they were of the evil voice that slithered through the dark every few minutes. Finally, the tunnel ended in a huge room filled with more carvings. Jotham's torch was getting short now, and he tore another length from his tunic. The room reminded Ishtar of the throne room back in the palace. All around it, its walls were cut tall archways that led to other tunnels. The archways were decorated with carved images of ancient ancestors. One was of a man walking between two falls of water. Another showed two walls of water. Another showed a man being spit out by a great fish. Then in the dimming light, they came across a flat, white stone with writing on it, and Ishtar gasped. Jotham looked at him in amazement. "You can read this?" "Yes," Ishtar said, barely able to whisper. "It says, 'We wait in peace, for this is the place where the Messiah shall come to earth.'" At that moment, the voice of the devil cut through the dark. "I am here, little one," Decca hissed like a snake. Jotham screamed and spun around in terror. In the orange light of the torch, Ishtar saw Decca's face only inches away from his friend. "Yes, I am here," he said again, "and now you are finally mine." Decca grabbed the front of Jotham's tunic, but Jotham plunged his torch square into the ugly man's face. Decca screamed and let go, holding his face in his hands. "Run!" Jotham commanded Ishtar, and the two boys took off down one side of the tunnel. Behind them, they could hear Decca cursing and yelling more threats. Ishtar was running so fast it reminded him of the camels when they smelled the water. The torch was getting low again and barely lit the path ahead. A moment later, the tunnel turned, but the boys didn't, and they crashed headfirst into a skeleton hanging in the alcove. They both fell to the ground, and the bones of some long-dead merchants or priests crashing down around them like a cage. Ishtar screamed and began thrashing about like a fish out of water. Jotham just stood to his feet and threw aside the bones. "That's it," he yelled. "I can't take this anymore." With that, he picked up the torch and started back up the tunnel toward Decca. "Where are you going?" Ishtar cried in panic. "I'm going to kill him." "You're what?" Ishtar yelled, and as Jotham and the light moved away into the darkness, Ishtar had to make a decision. That's the end of today. Despite his best intentions, Ishtar once again finds himself lost and separated from his bodyguard. Despite our best intentions, we all sometimes make mistakes or do things we know we shouldn't, which separates us from the one who helps and protects us. All it takes to find him again is to realize we were wrong, ask his forgiveness, and cry for help. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. Psalm 145:18. Let's see if they can escape from Decca tomorrow.